Okay, our next presentation is Andrew Washburn and Andrea Cook, and they will be presenting on Indigenous collections management at the Alaska State Museum.
I'll use this mic. Hi, my name is Andrew Washburn. I'm the museum registrar at the Alaska State Museum, and I'm with my friend, colleague, Andrea Cook. We're here to talk about an experience we both had in creating an internship opportunity at the Alaska State Museum involving Indigenous collections management. I'm going to give a brief sort of background, provide some context, and then Andrea is going to share more about her personal experience. Before we get too far down the road, I do want to acknowledge that we are on Aquan, Klinkadani, and I hope to be a good visitor. I also want to acknowledge the university for putting this together. Power and privilege is a great thing. I wish I could see more people who are in the work that I do down here, and hopefully year after year those numbers will grow and the community will take advantage of what a great opportunity to have these kinds of conversations.
Does this one work? Yep. Okay, I'm gonna move it right there. My name is Raju. I'm from Heidelberg, and I go to school here now at UAS. And yeah, I'm just gonna go ahead and you wanna go through this and then?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm just introducing myself. We're gonna go through the slides and then I'll share my experience with you all. And I really hope that you know, we all can learn something today.
Thanks. Like I said, I'm just going to provide a little bit of background, a little context, because we're talking about museum practice, and that might be a little outside of the box for some of you. So the term in the title that perhaps needs more definition is collections management. Basically what this means is keeping track of all the objects in the museum, and it's also involves ensuring that the information about those collections. Hello? Okay. In and out. Okay.
Technical difficulties. Excuse us, everyone.
Is this? Oh, this sounds better too. Okay. Collections management is basically keeping track of all the objects in the collection and the information. And then as I think the most important thing is, it's also controlling access to those objects. At the Alaska State Museum, we have about 40,000 objects. This is a little secret in the museum world, most museums only have about 2 to 7% of their collections on display at any given moment. We have about 5%. About 65% of those collections could be considered what they call in the museum world ethnographic. Basically means of indigenous manufacture. However, the other 35% could also be of indigenous manufacture, but just not old, I guess is one way to put it. Many of the collections, well, the State Museum didn't begin until just after the turn of the 20th century. Many of the collections started in the late 1880s. So if you've been downtown to the galleries, you'll also notice that at least half of the galleries are devoted to Alaska Native cultures and telling the stories related to the objects on display there. And so it represents telling those stories, sharing that material culture is the vast majority of what we do. So that's what makes these other numbers kind of a bit more shocking. there's only 2 permanent staff members who identify themselves as Alaska Native at the State Museum, and that's both here in Juneau and at our sister institution in Sitka. Over the last 100 years, there's only been 1 member of the museum leadership that identified themselves as Alaska Native. Yes, sir. Okay, right here. Okay, a little too close. Is that better? Okay, awesome. Thank you. Apologies. Was that all clear before, or should I repeat myself for just a moment? Anyhow, Andrew P. Kashaveroff was the only Alaska Native who ran the Alaska State Museum, or at the time when he was, it was the Territorial Museum and Library. And of course, our building downtown is named after him. So with those numbers in mind, the goal of the program that we set out to, and Andrea and I piloted this summer, is to change that, is to recognize that represents a disconnect. And how we're going to change that is, well, there's many different ways, but I only know the one ways that I could affect, and that was to try to bring some people in and try to impart what I know, so that the next time my job becomes available, or the next time another job becomes available, there'll be somebody with the skills to take that over. So there's sort of got 3 different ways we can create opportunities, and that's what we're here today to talk about. Also want to talk about how we demonstrate the value of non-academic learning, of the education systems beyond those that I grew up going to, which landed me in this job. We also building long-lasting and sustaining connections in the community. So created this program that involves some basic professional skills, coming into work, how to work around the office, how to show up on time, that stuff, how to use email, how to use computers, that sort of thing. And then, more importantly, introduction to the different skills and terms and basic aspects of the museum field. And then finally, the creation of a special project whose direction and scope was completely up to Andrea, and completion of that. So without me droning on any more about this, I'm going to turn this over to Andrea, and she's going to describe how she experienced this, and then hopefully at the end we'll have some time for questions.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all here. I'm very familiar with most of you, so it's good. It's good to be here. So I'm going to share my experience. This is all written out, so I took some time to prepare this for you all today. In February 2019, I was in a Northwest Coast beginning carving course with Master Carver Wayne Price. This class had the chance of touring the Alaska State Museum Collections Vault, where we examined early works of bamboo boxes and tools. Andrew Washburn led our group through the vault. And during the tour, he mentioned the ongoing need for volunteers to assist organizing the artifacts. Without hesitation, I let my interest be known and soon began volunteering every Friday. As the semester ended, I expressed my need for employment. This meant I would not be able to volunteer much longer. An opportunity to apply to the Ethel Montgomery Scholarship became an option that would then allow me to stay at the museum and receive the income that I needed. The scholarship is exclusively for Alaska Native graduate students, whereas I am an undergraduate. And yet, I completed the application and provided what was needed. This was my first challenge, and it was when I first questioned, Do I really belong in this space? The scholarship was not immediately granted because I did not meet the proposed education requirement, but I am Alaska Native. Further complicating the situation, this fund was used almost exclusively for tuition costs. So using it as a stipend for an internship was a new approach. The scholarship became an internship for the first time to an undergraduate student. I believe that providing opportunities like this to Alaska Native undergrads would be a catalyst to continuing higher education and will better serve tribal communities in several different ways. The proportion of Native Americans in graduate school is significantly smaller than the general population, and the proportion of Alaska Natives in graduate school is even smaller. Focusing this program on undergrad students can inspire them to further their education just as it has for me, whilst implementing Indigenous representation in areas that need it most. This can be beneficial to the Alaska State Museum and Alaska Native cultures because in time the information about the artifacts will become more accurate in the records, and it will reconnect a people to their belongings, which I believe is reconnecting these items to their purpose. With persistence, I, an Alaska Native undergraduate, demonstrated the value of Indigenous knowledge and its relevance to the museum. Once the complications of adjusting the scholarship to an internship stipend was settled, I could begin my training as a collections management intern. My training consisted of object handling training, writing condition reports, description narratives of the objects, data entry, and archival research. There is a mentality to handling and caring for objects that I found most surprising. Each object should be handled as if it should remain in its condition for 500 years. This sort of preservation of the objects is most important to the museum. That's why most of the collection is stored in a cool room and in drawers. Every item is inspected for pests and evaluated for, if needed, restoration. And there is absolutely no food or drinks past the CPR, which is the collections processing room. Every movement was calculated, and having a calm and collected demeanor before coming in contact with each object always came first. Some I couldn't touch because of its age or its current condition. The parallel of the strategies used to preserve things in my culture and many other Indigenous cultures is that there's a hands-on preservation, and with that an oral history. Meaning that originally our people did not write down our stories, but we told them within our art. Observing and actively being in contact with carvings, weavings, and any art form amongst my people is how an art form is passed on. It is most important to have our young people engaged and to give them knowledge that embeds in their spirit and identity. It is how we ensure our cultural practices stay alive for 500 years, and in fact, it's how we've maintained our cultures for thousands. Both strategies of preservation share the same interest of seeing these art forms into the future. My question is now, what was the motivation of the collectors when they found or purchased the items versus what was the motivation of those who made them? The next phase of my training allowed me to become familiar with the collection's database, logs, and files. This is where the paperwork is kept, which includes the deed of gifts, purchase receipts, descriptions, condition reports, and most of the time, but does not always include, the history or backstory of each item. There's a paradox here that I could not help but notice, and it's the fact that the backstory or history is not being represented by Indigenous peoples themselves, but written by someone who is considered more qualified by Western education standards. The database is now digitized on a program called Argus, though until recent decades, everything was kept in a paper document or in logbooks. Almost all of the information was transferred to Argus, but if I needed to find names of collectors, their funding organizations, or to see if there was additional pieces of information I could find, I would examine the files to better understand the transactions between the museum and the people who donated or sold the items. As I became familiar with the database, I remember feeling discordant in my training when I had to enter a spruce root basket into the category of ethnology. My initial thought was to place it in the art category in the database, and when my mentor said that I had to put it in the ethnology category, I greatly opposed. I questioned the terminology because I see weavings as an art form that thrives today and is difficult to master. So categorizing the spruce root basket as anything else but art really baffled me. Of course, I am new to this content and the way that it is kept, but I grew up watching these art forms practiced by my people, and never once did I think of them as ethnology. Each day I was at the museum, there was something new. The team stayed moving, whether it was to get a new exhibit ready, arranging objects in the vault, bringing items out for tours, or selecting specific objects for tribal members and visitors to analyze. I was right there alongside them, observing their work or being a helping hand with organization. There were days I would help reorganize the artifacts in drawers, moving them to their new homes, as we would call it. The people I worked with most consistently with was Andrew, Ellen, and Adriana. They are who I refer to as the team, and while shadowing them, I began forming working relationships with them. In between tasks, I would ask questions, and this would lead to many conversations that I undoubtedly learned from. They were great mentors and very passionate about their areas of profession, and it made the experience that much greater. We would discuss several topics, from our own personal lives to stories of people we have learned from and spoke to. These conversations usually stemmed from our interactions with the objects, and I believe that this is the power that the objects hold. It's the power of story. In that same sense, I did not only form relationships with the people I worked with, but with the objects I would interact with. I began feeling connections with objects that would bring forth several different emotions. I am grateful to have spent time with them and fortunate to have seen them, but another part of me would feel sorrow that they're not in their true homes. I would always bring my spirit to theirs with well intentions and respect, and that is to every object that I came in contact with. If I worked with Haida objects, I would say hau'a, dung di kwayadung, and deet lagung, which translates to thank you. You I love, and I am well. I knew these objects deserved to hear their language because these are not just objects, these are my ancestors. My approach led to a more formalized project that was labeled Haida 2019. This is where I was able to choose 11 Haida objects from about 200 that are in the collection. I further analyzed them, then gathered all of their available information that was at the museum. I made copies of each document and compiled them into their own working files that I would use as references for the spreadsheet I would create. In the columns of that spreadsheet, I focused on the designation of the crest, wrote updated condition reports as well as updated descriptions, added research sources, and the questions I had about each item. My objective to creating this spreadsheet was so that I could permanently add information to the records and give a Haida's perspective on the belongings to my people. In addition, I was able to correct the name of what we call copper shields, whereas in the records, they were previously labeled as Tana, which is what Tlingit people call theirs. Haida call copper tau. I also created another spreadsheet that had all of the Alaskan Haida clans in their crests. This will help designate items with specific crests that are carved, painted, or sewn onto them to their rightful clan. Though I only worked with about 5% of the Haida collection, it was still very important to me. In the selection of the 11 Haida objects I worked with, 3 of them were made by my great-great-great-grandfather, John Wallace. It's my Nana Joe's grandfather. She is still here, and I am grateful I get to return home to help her put up fish and listen to her stories each summer. My grandfather was a Haida master carver. His mentor was his father, Dwight Wallace. The Alaska State Museum is in possession of a 38-foot totem pole that was carved by Dwight Wallace and resides at the state office building here in Juneau. To be able to see his work up close was so empowering to me. The pole used to stand in the village of Saquon, and that is where we now lay our people to rest at the end of their physical lives. The 3 items I further analyzed that John Wallace made are carved of argillite, a stone that is only found in Haida Gwaii. There are 2 boxes he carved, and they have a wooden interior that was painted black to resemble the outer exterior. One has a frog carved on its lid, and the other has a sea lion on its lid. They both have intricate carvings on all 4 sides. He carved a food tray from argillite, and it was never used for its purpose, but it's such a beautiful piece of art that truly embodies his level of mastery in his time. On that tray, there appears to be a beaver and a sculpin on the outer edges, and there is a frog and a raven at the center. There is also a dugout canoe that he carved, and it is on display in the museum's exhibit. You could see it in the galleries. Being in the presence of my late grandfather's work was like looking at an extension of myself, a version of myself that I have not yet achieved. This experience has been life-changing because I was exposed to my family's line of artistry right there in front of my eyes, a true piece of my identity. What I did for his pieces was a little different than what I had done for the others. With curiosity and motivation to know more, I searched through several different sources to write a 1-page biography of John Wallace so I could enter that into the records and attach it to all of his work in the museum. I learned things about his life experiences that had parallels to mine. He was the only one of his father's children who took an interest in carving. But due to missionary presence in Klingkwan, he yearned for a Western education. He actually ran away from home twice to try and attend boarding school in Sitka and in Masset. He was only in Masset for a year before his father, Dwight Wallace, came after him and took him home. Dwight was afraid the art of the Kaigani Haidas would die. He forced his son to stay home and learn how to carve, because during the time, traditional practices and beliefs were heavily discouraged in educational systems and only accepted the values of practices of Christianity and the English language. The parallel to my life is the fact that I did attend boarding school. In Sitka, where I graduated from Mount Edgecombe, because I wanted an education just as my grandfather did. Though I did not have to leave my traditional practices or beliefs behind because now as Indigenous people, we are reclaiming who we are and there's no longer laws to force us not to. During my years at Mount Edgecombe, I grew as a Haida artist. That is where I created many of my first pieces of artwork. My senior year, I was recognized for my artistic achievements, and now my name is on a plaque, along with other students that are recognized for their artistic abilities. I had no idea about my grandfather's attempts to leave his culture and family behind until I was an intern at the Alaska State Museum. I felt so conflicted to find that he wanted an education so badly and never received it because of his father's fears. But because he stayed home and learned how to carve, I am able to sit and study his work now. When I went home to Heidelberg this summer for culture camp, I brought a folder with pictures of the 11 Haida objects to show my family. I was so eager to show my Nana Jo the work of her grandfather. While she was sitting at the table having her coffee and a cigarette, I brought this folder to her with the pages flipped open to the argillite carvings and told her who carved them. Her face instantly lit up with delight. She took the folder from my hands and sat there looking with an expression of familiarity. I could tell she was reminiscing in her quiet manner. After moments of silence, she looked at me and started telling me a story. She said, "When I was a little girl, I used to go to Grandpa's house and have coffee with him." She giggled and explained to me he had coffee while she had hot chocolate in a coffee cup. Then she goes on, "I remember visiting him and he would be carving that argillite." She said, "I could still see his hands covered in the black soot." And she put her hands up, showing me her palms as if hers were covered in the black soot too. For the rest of the afternoon, she sat and told me stories of my family and her fond memories of those who are gone now. She told me things that day that I have never heard before in my years spent with my Nana. It was such a special day to have been lived. As said before, this is the power of these things that are in the museum. It's the power of story, and each and every one of them have one. Some just haven't been told yet, or it's been a long time since they have. During my visit home this summer, I learned to weave a cedar hat with my older sister while my Nana Jo taught us. My Nana is a good weaver. She said she taught herself. We weaved the bark that my mother collected and stripped the year before. So this hat we wove together had so much love woven into it, and each of us had a part in the creation of it. The women in my family are weavers, or they make regalia. I have never been rich, but I have always had the fortune of having strong Haida women raise me and provide me with knowledge that is priceless. Since I was 13 years old, I have been practicing form line with a dream of one day being a carver like my grandfather. While learning to weave with my Nana, she told me that it's because of her grandfather I have that natural gift of form line. She says, "That's why you are an artist like you are." So even though I may never be a weaver as accomplished as her or the other women in my family, she still believes in the path that I am taking to become a carver. Working with my grandfather's art has reinforced my dream, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to achieve it while also living his dream of pursuing an education with the hope of giving back to my community one day. Believe me when I say this work has really healed me. So why is this important? Why did I pursue having the requirements change from being a scholarship for Alaska Native graduates to a stipend internship for Alaska Native undergraduates? The Ethel Montgomery Scholarship has been around since the 90s, but not has been utilized in the recent years at all. The funds have been sitting dormant. With my experience, I have demonstrated an opportunity that can serve a wider variety of Alaska's Indigenous people. After analyzing the files and seeing what type of objects are in the collection, such as grave markers and shaman emblems that past collectors brought to the museum, my belief is that this museum, as I'm sure many other ethnology museums, stem from white supremacy and colonization. I also understand the past collectors and curators believed that they were doing right in their efforts to preserve the past, because they thought Native people and their cultures would eventually no longer exist. But we are still here, still practicing our ways of life, in despite of the efforts to assimilate and the effects of genocide. 65% of the 40,000 objects belong to Alaska Natives across this state. Creating programs like this one I participated in can serve as a way to start decolonizing this space. I'm not claiming that my work is the only way to do this, but I am encouraging that the process starts. Decolonizing a space that is founded on colonial power needs decolonial mindset for everyone that is involved on every level. The Alaska State Museum has wonderful people caretaking for these belongings. They weren't the ones to partake in the wrongdoings of old museum practices. They involve tribal members in exhibits. They do study groups working with ancient dyes. They check out clan objects for parties and gatherings. But there can be so much more done to involve Indigenous people so that they can represent themselves in this space. Sharing the authority of documentation, interpretation, and perspective of Native cultures with the people that are in their collections should be a priority. My hope is that one day the space can be one that is healing and brings Native people closer to their ancestors, just as it has done for me. Of course, there will be complications in the making of this new legacy I am proposing. There will be hard conversations that take place and disputes among each other, but that should not stop the efforts to better serve tribal communities, whilst implementing and privileging Indigenous knowledge in areas that need it most. I want to say how to all of those who made my opportunity possible. I also want to express my gratitude and love for Sonia Ibarra, who was a strong advocate for me when this internship first began, and for also constantly encouraging me to do my best and believing in me. I'm done. Now, if anyone has questions, you are so welcome to ask. Everyone has to hear it.
So those blankets, they were in drawers. Those are the things that you were able to look at, and they're just in drawers? I mean, is that? But it just seems like. Why isn't there more expansion in place created for those to be displayed? Is it more of to preserve them, or to? I mean, they seem like good relics. Like why? Just seem, I just wanted to say it just seemed like a waste that they were in there and not being displayed.
I totally agree with you. It is for a part of their preservation. Handling them in every strategy that's taken to preserve them is what they're doing. But you're right, when there's, it could seem as a waste when there's limited access and exposure of those things. They are in drawers, and they have been there for a long time. So, yes, All of my grandfather's work is in drawers too, except for that canoe that's in the exhibit that's hanging up from the ceiling. Yes.
I think you said that perfectly, and that's a really good question. And I won't apologize for all the things that are not shared with the public at the museum, other than to say that it, just from a number standpoint, to display an object, it takes about 12 square feet, and to store one, it takes about 3. So that's on average. And you know, there are some museums like the Anthropology Museum at UBC that has 90% of their objects even in storage that is visible to the public, but that's an exception to the rule in most museums, and it's kind of one of those things that we want to address.
I'd only just started researching the area, and it didn't seem like there wasn't hardly any artifacts available in here. There's drawers everywhere.
40,000.
That's good news.
But that people don't know, that Andrea needs to come to learn about her great-great-grandfather and sort of luck into it almost is one of the things that we're trying to address, but it's a first step in a long process.
Any other questions? Bring her the mic.
How would you recommend people finding out if they have any artwork from their families in the museum?
Go down to the museum, and also check in the archives. I spent hours for days looking for the things that I found. So it just takes time, and it takes motivation to want to know where you come from. You know, in a way that hasn't been, you know, just given to you. Like, you know, with what my non shared with me, that was given to me, you know, and it's just a different way of searching for that and having that access. You have to really put yourself and be ready to find things that, to find things and stories that you would never expect.
So a follow-up to that question, does that mean that they're all cataloged, and does the university reach out to other groups, telling them to please check this out, come find
The
the
university did not ask me to do any of this. I was brought to that, to the collections with Wayne Price here. He brought me down, and I did not get to see my grandfather's things right off the bat. I didn't know that they were in there. So the opportunity, like Andrew said, it was really by chance that I got to have that experience.
So are you saying the museum does not have an outreach program?
Not one that I was outreach to.
That would address that, your question. There isn't a formal program, but I can say if you want to know if there are things from your family, your clan, your village, your business, your grandfather's fishing boat in the museum, you can call me. You know, there will be one day that we're working on getting our collections available online. But again, as Andrea will tell you, just turning on our database live is problematic because the records are so old and antiquated. Some of the language is inaccurate or frankly
Racist.
offensive.
Yeah.
Dan has a question.
I guess not a question, or I think you've said it all, how valuable this opportunity was and how it brings you back to your culture on so many levels. And that's really beautiful. For many years, and I want to thank Andrew for doing this, Steve Hendrickson and Bob Banghart. Over the years, this is a cry for help and for funding, and we've tried to get a professional certificate program going, and it's just never taken traction, largely because the university has not dedicated funds and resources to a program like this. The state archives, the state museums are interested, but we've never made the final movement towards it. We have a few classes in place. We've had a dialogue with the museums and archives to get a one-year certificate program that would serve people on all levels, whether you have a high school degree or you have a master's degree or a PhD. And with heritage tourism growing in the state, to me that's a job-ready program and something that we would be doing to serve so many communities in Alaska. We have the resources. Many of the instructors could be folks at the archives and museum. We could house some of the classes, provide the certification. So I am so proud of you for all the work you've done, and maybe you'll lead the way just as a few other students have taken part in this. So thank you so much, Hawa, for your great work, and what a beautiful presentation today.
I'll add one thing as well, Dan. This is also an invitation from more students. So if you know somebody, if you yourself are interested.
Please contact Andrew Washburn.
Hi, Andrea. I would like to thank you for the respect that you showed to the objects and the staff as well. I was fortunate enough to travel with Tlingit and Haida on two repatriation visits, and I've been to 5 museums and back into the collections and looked at the things that are back in the collection areas. It occurs to me that what you're talking about and the connection that you made is a drop in the sea, because there's so many stories. You know, you said all these items have the power of story, and when you look at the collections, like in Kansas City, they have a limestone cave that is climate controlled, and it's an acre underground of shelving that nobody gets into and nobody sees it. They have winter count blankets from our relatives down south that tell us clan story for a whole winter, and the clan doesn't know it's there. This is the tip of the iceberg, and what I would suggest is that if you see it as large of an issue as it is across every museum, the ownership and things like that, where there's not funding for a position, there's, you know, we want to do this, but there's no structure involved. I would suggest that there needs to be a overarching national structure and importance put onto it, and that this be called a field and the name be given to it, a study, or, you know, that there's an advocacy to get these connections made and things moved back to where they need to be. If nothing else, just the outreach becoming more systemic for what's a systemic problem. But you've done some wonderful things, Andrea, and I want to thank you.
Thank you. And there is one thing that I don't mention in my presentation, and it is that I didn't get funding until the end of the summer. I had to work a second job to support myself, because this was the first time that this ever happened. So I was being very patient, and I did not allow funding to be an issue because of how important the work that I was doing was. And you know, it put me in situations that were really difficult as a young person, and I'm living on my own. So I really hope that it actually is addressed, and you know, that funding is not an issue no more. If there are people offering their knowledge to an institution like this, it should always be paid for. It should really always be compensated, because that's a lot. I experienced it myself. It's a lot to give. But in return, I was getting a lot too. So it's really what made me do what I did.
Andrea, you said you were patient. I would say tenacious and unrelenting, and you were able to lean on your personal support network in a way that made this possible. You broke ground here, and it's my hope that not only can the program continue, but nobody else needs to sacrifice the way you did to make this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Good evening. Gonna cheese for a wonderful presentation, very well thought out, and I'm the associate professor for Northwest Coast Native Arts, and within the program we have form line class and we have carving class, and there's absolutely the best directions that can be given in our program is to go see the old stuff. I got many years of carving, and I bring that, and I've got many years of form line, I bring that. But the best is to go see the original artifacts, and the best collections of those artifacts happen to be in all the museums. And I've been in the Field Museum, I've been in the collection from Shotridge in Philadelphia, I've been in the American Museum of Natural History, and I got to go down in the basements and look at the original stuff. And I'll tell a story of a tooth, a whale's tooth, shaman's charm that was in the American Museum of Natural History. And I was so inspired by that tooth that I carved one out of yellow cedar. And I knew it would never be able to be in this land again. So I went and took that carving and I just held it up as I was running my boat, and I said, "Go through me, use my eyes." And we did a performance for an opening in the American Museum of Natural History, and Clarissa and her sister, and I had a wonderful dance room, but there was only 4 of us. And we all peeked out there, and it was the opening for the artifacts in the Northwest Coast. And we had kind of a meltdown. There's 4 of us, and we need 20, and there's 600 of them out there. And I looked around really fast, and all the artifacts we were in the same room as the artifacts at the show that was going to be open. I said, "I'm not dancing for them. How long do you think it's been since they've heard our music?" And that just tied us together. And we gave a heck of a show, and we opened up the show, so those archives are all available, and the State Museum was very gracious and very helpful. On our last visit, it was supposed to cost because of the budget and stuff, and they waived the stipend, and I had 16 students come in there, and we looked at the archives. So the State Museum is very supportive, and the UAS is breaking ground. We're not doing things exactly status quo, but we're accomplishing some great things. I just think of like 10 years ago and the work that I was doing, and then what I see happening now, and the growth that's happening now. And that's what has to be recognized, is that times are changing. It seems to be slow, but it is changing, and there's a lot more happening than there has been. So this is a great time now, but all these artifacts are there. There's quite a few of them. The Shotridge collection was 480 pieces, and I got to see it all in a real long day. And then we got rash because of they spray that stuff with stuff to kill the bugs, and even with the gloves on, we still get it. But man, you know, we have a rich, rich heritage, and the colonization and the residential schools had their effect, and almost successful. But it was folks like your grandpa, you know, that during those days, there was a grandpa here, a carver here, a weaver here, and they were, and they kept it going. The language is just threadbare, but it's making this comeback now and resurgence now, and that's so. I carved a healing totem for the residential schools in Whitehorse, and I said it in my speech. I said, how can I ever be strong enough to ever deal with the issues of the residential schools within my art? I'm just a carver. And what we did past. This is what happened to us. None of this is going to be pretty. And we did present, is here we are now, and then we did the future. What are we going to do next? You know, so, and that's where we are in these days, is that it's people making the difference to go say, hey, those artifacts, and I felt it too, is that these artifacts are pretty lonely, and they haven't heard any music in a long time. And, you know, if we have that connection of the seen and the unseen worlds, then maybe our journeys should go. And you should go open and look and open up them drawers and look for yourself and see what it's going and see how they are and sing a song for them. They'll probably listen. So, you know, stuff like that. So, and that's where the change is going to start to happen, because the message of our culture is a beautiful message, and it deserves to be heard today. We're dealing with the plastic coming into the ocean by the metric tons now, and there's a lot of change going on, and I think the issues of the cultural revival extend into what's going to happen next on our Earth. It's our Mother Earth. We don't get no other Mother Earth. This is the one we got. We got to take care of it. And can we do it through the art? Hell yeah.
Yes, we can.
Thank you.
Oh, and I'm gonna say Ganesh Cheesh too, because I love you, Wayne, and I really appreciate, you know, the land I'm on and the people that I am surrounded with every day.
Thank you all for coming.